Gloves are coming off in the battle between Democrats and the Trump administration, and now House leaders are threatening to subpoena the White House to get documents related to their inquiry.
Any effort by the Secretary, by the President, or anyone else to interfere with the Congress's ability to call before it relevant witnesses will be considered as evidence of obstruction.
The move came after Secretary of State Mike Pompeo refused to comply with subpoenas sent to the State Department.
We won't tolerate folks on Capitol Hill bullying, intimidating State Department employees. That's unacceptable.
That, by the way, is the same man who has finally admitted he was listening in on Trump's call with Ukraine after professing no knowledge till now. But as Pompeo stonewalls, his department's inspector general is breaking ranks, reportedly briefing Congress on the Ukraine issue today at his request. But will any of this really matter to Republicans in the Senate, where they ultimately have the power to remove or not a president from office? Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says he'd have to at least bring it up if it got to them.
I would have no choice but to take it up. How long you're on it is a whole different matter.
Basically, Republicans could vote to end any trial almost as soon as it begins. And if Republican voters are any indication, that could very well happen. New poll shows just 4 in 10 Republicans believe that Trump mentioned Biden on the Ukraine call, even though the president himself says he did. And the memo he released to the call includes an entire paragraph on the subject. And as for the president,
well, I always cooperate. This is a hoax, but we'll work together with Shifty Schiff and Pelosi and all of them, and we'll see what happens.
That we will. Joining me to discuss are Glenn Carle. He's a former intelligence officer of the CIA and the author of The Interrogator. Glenn, it's good to see you again. Thanks for being here. Amy Carnevale is a member of the GOP State Committee in Massachusetts. Amy, it's great to meet you.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks so much for being here. So the most senior Republican in the Senate, Chuck Grassley, has said of the whistleblower, he ought to be heard and protected. Here's what the President of the United States said about the whistleblower in the Oval Office this afternoon.
He either got it totally wrong, made it up, or the person giving the information to the whistleblower was dishonest. And this country has to find out who that person was, because that person's a spy, in my opinion.
Spy. He's used the term treason, which, as you know, is punishable by death. Which of those two men got it right?
Well, Jim, certainly that's strong language from the president, but I think it's as a result of the fact that really this impeachment effort started the day the president was elected. It's the far left segment of the Democratic Party that has sought from day one to pursue this effort. And really, I think most Americans realize that this call with the Ukrainian president is more politics, and it's to further that agenda from the far left of the party.
To quote the president himself in his own summary, you're not troubled by the fact that he spoke to the leader of another country and solicited dirt on his political rival.
So certainly any whistleblower should have the opportunity to come forward and submit what they believe to be wrongdoing, and that person should have their day.
No, but I was referring to your thing about the far left of the Democratic Party. They had nothing to do with that phone call. I'm asking you, as a Republican, are you troubled by what the president himself said he asked of the leader of Ukraine?
Certainly, I would use it. Would have a different tone and tenor and use different language than what the president did. For sure. I'm a Massachusetts Republican. That's a little different breed than I think Republicans across the rest of the country.
Staying on the whistleblower just for a second, as someone who had the career you did, how concerned are you about whistleblowers in general if the President of the United States essentially either doesn't understand the law or chooses to ignore the protections of the law?
Well, I've said in many interviews for years now that there's an existential crisis for our government, because how does a member of the executive branch fulfill his oath by serving a chief executive who, by serving him, you betray your oath? You can't do it. He shares intelligence with foreign powers. He denigrates facts he doesn't like. And now he calls for the ignoring of or overturning of whistleblower statutes that are designed to protect people to report wrongdoing on whatever the direction of the wrongdoing. So it's very disturbing.
Speaking of intelligence agencies reworked, the Attorney General is apparently going around the world soliciting information that would either would undercut, he would argue, the Mueller report, but more relevant to your career, would also undermine the intelligence agencies, all of which determined that there had been Russian interference. What does that do to a careerist? What's the impact of the leader of the free world sending out his AG essentially, and this is not overstated, to suggest that the intelligence agencies have no idea what they're talking about.
That's right. Well, facts are accepted if they support the person in charge, and then they're denigrated, and the people who bring them are destroyed if they aren't helpful to the person in charge. What that does is create a crisis that I exploited as an intelligence officer in foreigners for decades, which is to say you are confronted with a problem. If you serve your institutions, you betray your values, and if you don't serve them, you commit treason. But maybe by working with me, you can help. It's that significant a crisis of loyalty and faith when the chief executive undermines the processes and laws of the state.
Do you worry about these loyalty tests? I mean, if I can, with the Inspector General, we don't know what he is saying to Congress today. We do know that in August, there were reports that he had determined, this is again the Inspector General in the State Department, the same guy who's going up there this afternoon, found that leadership of one of the departments in the State Department mistreated and harassed staffers, accusing them of disloyalty to President Trump, and there was retaliation. Is that problematic?
So, Jim, part of the reason the president was elected was because he is a disruptor. He has a different style of leadership, a different brand of leadership. Again, it's leadership that that perhaps as a Massachusetts Republican I wouldn't necessarily embrace. But that's the reason he was elected by the American public, because he does disrupt government institutions. And
but it's not about disruption. He acknowledges, I hate to go back to the beginning of all this, he acknowledges he solicited damaging information from a foreign country about a political adversary. That's not just being a disruptor. That's a violation of American law. I mean, Congress will decide whether it's an impeachable offense. It is a violation of election laws to do that.
So back to the Ukraine conversation. So I think that the evidence shows that actually what he was talking about in that conversation was the last election and Vice President Biden's and his son's role in the DNC server that may have
searching for dirt,
Ukraine.
Using the organs of state for personal political advantage, which is outrageous, illegal, and impeachable.
Is there one word that he stated that's not true?
It was a discussion of corruption. That the reason the president of Ukraine was elected and the reason the president of the United States was elected was because they wanted to get at corruption.
And you know that Joe Biden wanted to get at corruption, too. He was concerned that the prosecutor wasn't doing enough to root out corruption, despite the conventional wisdom, I guess, in this country amongst Trump supporters, is that he wanted him to back off this thing. You know, one of the most troubling parts of all this whole thing in the era of Trump is the grotesque polarization in this country. It is horrible. That poll I mentioned a minute ago, where 40% thinks the president probably did bring up Biden, even though he admitted he did. 29% of Republicans in that poll said the president probably did not bring up Joe Biden when the president himself admits that he did. Does that not trouble
Jim,
you?
I think most Americans just want to see the president do his job, and they want to see Congress do their job.
Legally.
And legally, correct.
So
and they'd like to see them work together to do that job.
You mentioned mass Republicans. Do you remember that mass Republican, Mitt Romney? Remember him when he was governor of Massachusetts? Here's what he said on the 22nd in a tweet. If the president asked or pressured Ukraine's president to investigate his political rival, either directly or through his personal attorney, and obviously we found that he did in both cases, it would be troubling in the extreme, critical for the facts to come out. Why aren't more Republicans, I really mean this in the most sincere way, I'm not suggesting they should all rise up and say, let's impeach him, get him out of office. Why is every Republican not saying the same thing? This troubles me. It may not lead to anything, but it is troubling in the extreme. Why aren't they all? Are you saying this?
Well, no, I think most Republicans are supportive of letting the facts play out. At the same time,
can you name 5 in Congress who have said that?
Yes.
You can?
There are plenty.
Take your
there
time.
Are plenty.
Who are
there are
they?
Plenty. But,
who remain nameless.
Republicans don't necessarily want to go on the record against the president, but if you talk to them one-on-one, of course, they support letting the facts play out.
You need to step up to fulfill your function, your obligation as a public servant and as a citizen, rather than to dance with verbal pyrotechnics.
You know, I say, Glenn, I'm glad you said that, but I have to say, I've said that a lot the last few days, but then people have said back to me, name for me more than 5 people in recent American history who've had the courage to stand up to injustice and corruption in the government. We can name some high-profile people, but they are few and far between. Are we asking too much of
No, I don't
careerists
think.
to stand
Yeah,
up?
I don't think that is correct. Actually, I think the dynamic that is disturbing and threatens our institutions and our democracy is one that I lived. I had a visit from when I was still working from a senior member of the administration to come see work on the National Intelligence Council.
Which administration was this?
Bush. Bush.
The younger.
The younger. And I approached him and chatted, and I said, you guys treat us like we're the enemy, and we're just trying to do our job, which is to speak truth to power, which is unpleasant, but that's our assignment. And he said, you are the enemy. And that was chilling, because that politicization of functions is very disturbing. What that has turned to in our current context is the most shocking thing of all to me. Not that Trump is impeachable or a crook or corrupt or incompetent, but that you won't find under any rock any Republican who has put nation in front of party. It's just astounding.
They retire instead. Amy, we got to go. It's a pleasure to meet you. Thanks so much for
Thank you.
being here, Glenn. It's good to see you, as always.